There's an old story I like, and I couldn't remember who I'd heard it attributed to, but I found online someone attributing it to Rabbi Chaim Soloveitchik, the grandfather of Rav Soloveitchik, and also, in his own right, a brilliant scholar and Torah teacher. But I don't know for sure if the story is really about him or not, but it's a good story, so I want to share it with you. Someone one day was asking him about one of his recent rulings regarding Shabbat and asked, why was he being mekel? Why is he being lenient regarding the breaking of Shabbat? And he replied to them, I'm not being lenient on that, I'm being machmir on the commandment to protect life. I am being strict and stringent on something else. It may appear to you that I'm being lenient on this mitzvah, but the truth is, I'm being strict about a different mitzvah. Because often, the different mitzvot, the different commandments that we have, conflict. Often there are different values in Jewish law that have to be balanced. We all know Shammai and Hillel. We all know the famous disputes of them. Rabbis talk about them all the time from the Bima. Hebrew school teachers teach about them. They're famous, famous stories. In particular, the most famous dispute between Shammai and Hillel was the person who wanted to convert and went to each of them asking to teach them everything about Judaism while they stood on one foot. And we know from these stories that Shammai is the stricter one. He's the one who's more machmir. And Hillel is more lenient, more welcoming. Shammai sends him away. Hillel famously says, don't do to others what is hateful to you, and the rest is commentary. Story after story goes on like this in the different disputes between Shammai and Hillel. When a bride asks on their wedding day, do I look pretty or not? This isn't applicable. Don't listen to Shammai. Shammai says, never lie. If she looks ugly, tell her she looks ugly, even if it's her wedding day. Hillel says, tell her she looks beautiful. It's okay to lie because every bride looks beautiful on their wedding day. It's not really a lie. And even if it is a lie, it's okay to lie in that case, because you want to spare somebody's feelings on an important day. Right? Shammai is the strict one. There are stories about Shammai being so strict, I love this one, that his grandson, the rabbis say, was born, in the Talmud of the story, his grandson was born on Sukkot, and what did he do? He went into the chamber where his daughter had given birth and was laying with his new grandchild, and he broke a hole in the ceiling so he could turn it into a sukkah, so that his grandson could fulfill the mitzvah of dwelling in a sukkah. My wife's watching. Please give birth before Sukkot. I don't want to make a hole in our roof. There's a lot of floors at Sunnybrook. There'll be a lot of roofs to break through. But Shammai is the strict one. But the truth is that universally there is no rabbi who is always strict and no rabbi who is always lenient. The question is, what are they being strict about and what is it that they're being lenient about? In Gittin, Beit Shammai is strict. In Tractate Gittin in the Talmud, he says, a man can only divorce his wife if he finds out that she is sleeping with another man. He strictly and narrowly interprets the Torah's commandment that you can divorce your wife because you find something unseemly in her. He's being strict. Hillel takes the more lenient approach. He says you can divorce your wife more broadly, simply burning the dinner. That's something unseemly. I've had dry chicken before. I find that unseemly. Hillel here is being lenient. But is that really lenient, what we want? Sure, Beit Shammai is more strict, but he's more lenient when it comes to women's rights, or in this case, actually more strict about them. A similar case happens about a woman reporting on the death of her husband. In general, a woman cannot testify in Jewish law. The only case the Torah gives us is when he dies out in the field reaping and there are no other witnesses. And Hillel understands this to mean simply that. Beit Shammai, the strict one, wants to make it more broad and expands it to other cases where there is nobody to witness the death. He expands it to other cases allowing the woman to remarry, to not remain a widow, chained to a dead husband for the rest of her life. Beit Shammai, though, we say, is the strict one. Hillel's the one we should be like, the lenient one. But the truth is, when it comes to women's rights, Beit Shammai goes with by far the more liberal philosophy. And I bring all of this up because eventually, someday, this pandemic will finally be behind us. Someday we will be past all of these extra rules and regulations, the difficulties that we have gathering together now. And when COVID first began and it was clear we could not gather together in person, the CJLS, the Committee of Jewish Law and Standards, the law committee of the conservative movement, ruled in an emergency ruling they issued permitting virtual Minyan. And this ruling was clearly defined for a time of extenuating circumstances, an extraordinary situation where it was clear we could not safely gather together for a long, extended period of time. Well, now the question is, when does that ruling no longer apply? When are we past the Shabbat August, the extraordinary circumstances that permitted such a ruling? Well, the CJLS recently voted on several new tshuvot about virtual Minyan. Rabbi Joshua Heller wrote one paper with 3 different rulings inside it, and all 3 options were voted on individually, and all 3 passed. The first was that only mourner's Kaddish could be recited virtually, not other ritual acts that traditionally require a quorum of 10. Kedusha, Torah reading, Baruch, these must be done when you have 10 people physically together. But mourner's Kaddish, separate from that, could be recited virtually. That one passed. Another ruling that passed was that in a place that is already lenient, in communities where if they have 9 people gathered together, they include a child or the Torah as the 10th person, completing the quorum. In those communities, they could include a virtual attendee when you have 9 gathered in person. This one passed. But the one I have a real problem with is the third one. If there are 10 people on Zoom, where they can see each other and hear each other, or a mix of in-person and online people who can see and hear each other, as long as you have 10 in total, everything can be done. The Minyan can now permanently, not in the case of an extraordinary circumstance, but permanently be held virtually. Not people at home joining us virtually when we have 10 people here, like had previously been the case before COVID began. But the Minyan can move permanently online. And I have real problems with this ruling. And I know that to some that makes me sound like an old fogey. To some it might sound like I'm fear-mongering when I say that that is the death of conservative Judaism as we know it. I know that if by some chance anybody under 30 is watching this, they're going to say, okay, boomer to me as I have to others. But the truth is, I'm for halakhic diversity. I'm usually the very lenient rabbi, as many of you know. I'm usually the one who says, let live and live. Let them do what they want over there, and we'll do what we want over here. And everybody can find a community that reflects their values. Everybody can find a community where they best fit. But previously, halakhic differences were restricted by geography. The rulings of the law committee are not binding on any conservative rabbi. Each mar da'atra, each local leader of each synagogue can decide for their community which ruling they're going to follow, or even if they're going to pick their own ruling and make their own. Yet here in this case, it's not the same. It's not about picking a synagogue up the road or another synagogue when you don't like your rabbi's halakhic ruling. You can go to any synagogue in the world. You can attend virtually. It is the end of conservative Judaism as we know it. Because it is the death of minyanim in local synagogues. It's great, sure, for synagogues that can't make a minyan and could not before the pandemic. But we could here at Beth Tikvah. Here in Toronto, many of the conservative synagogues could. And this is going to be the death of those minyanim. And it's ironic, perhaps, because just a few weeks ago, I stood not up here, but in the tent, when we were still in the tent, and I gave a sermon, and I said in that sermon, we are a Beit Knesset, not a Beit Tefillah. We are a house of gathering, not a house of prayer. But this isn't the death of prayer. That's not why I'm upset about the lack of minyan. It's the death of community. The bond people build when they come to Minyan, whether they're there to say Kaddish, whether they're there to read Torah, or just to have something to do in the morning. That bond cannot be replicated online. Yet I fear the ease and convenience of virtual Minyan will keep many from returning to synagogue. When I came to Canada a little over 4 years ago, I felt in ways like I was walking into a time capsule of Judaism, or at least conservative Judaism. There were no conservative synagogues with guitar and organs. There were no conservative synagogues at the time publicly with a policy performing same-sex marriage. There are very few. Beth Tikvah was one of the first to be egalitarian and include women in leadership roles in Minyan. And I felt very strongly that there was a lot in the Toronto Jewish community that could change and should change. Yet I also saw a Judaism that I didn't see so much in LA, that I didn't see in other cities I visited throughout the United States. Because in there, I saw communities that couldn't make a daily minyan, that said to congregants in need of Kaddish, you have to go up the road. You have to go somewhere else. We can't provide that service for you. And I saw synagogue by synagogue as they sent their congregants to other synagogues in their time of need, in the time when they most needed a place to go pray, a place to be together with others. We can't provide you that service. You have to go up the road. Well, eventually those people went up the road all the time. It was the death of synagogues. When a synagogue says, we don't have 10 people who care enough about prayer, 10 people who can be here to gather as a community, it's not the right message. And we should be more than just a house of prayer. But if we don't have prayer, what are we? And my problem with this ruling of the CJLS, with Rabbi Heller's ruling, is that it doesn't take into consideration that it's not about the different views of local rabbis. There are synagogues with multi-million-dollar budgets for streaming alone. I watched for the holidays a synagogue that had a camera crane do a beautiful panoramic panning, zooming out as the ark opened with Kol Nidre. It was absolutely stunning. We can't compete with that. If you want to watch online, there's going to be much better streams out there. And the truth is, I hear already from congregants who tell me that on Shabbat they go up the road. But they don't go up the road. They go to Florida, they go to New York, they go to Los Angeles. When you have synagogues that can produce a live stream like a movie, it's the end of other shuls when that becomes the norm. Not something for a special case, a special circumstance, but simply where we go to pray. We turn to online as our sole mode of prayer and community and minyan. In the end, you'll really only need one synagogue in each time zone. Although I've heard from some that they like to daven on the West Coast because it's later. After all, a 9 a.m. service starts at noon our time. What does this mean when we say that it's not in a special circumstance we can go online when we can't gather in person, but simply because it's more convenient? There was another tshuva passed, a fourth ruling from the law committee by Rabbi David Fine. And this one declares that virtual minyan must be only for the duration of COVID. Only during the time that it is unsafe to attend synagogue. Only when human life is at stake, and only when it's to a degree greater than other risks that we take every day. Remember, after all, every time you get in the car, your life is at stake. Every time you get in the shower, your life is at stake. People have died from trying to eat a pretzel. There's always risk, but we take risk and we accept risk. And there's a point where right now here in Toronto, coming to synagogue, sitting distant from everybody, sitting with masks, this to me doesn't feel like a very big risk. And I get there are people that have extenuating circumstance, people with immune systems that are compromised, people who may not yet feel safe and comfortable joining us in shul. I don't want to put the pressure on you. but to people that are going out to the mall, people that are going out to restaurants. It's time you go to shul too. Not online, but in person. There's an announcement that went out this week, which is that starting next week on Friday morning, our morning minyan, our shacharit service, will be temporarily suspended. But I'm giving you this sermon today because I have a fear. I have a fear that might become permanent. And I'm not usually the strict one. People know this. But I think it's a mistake. I think it's a sad future when we cannot gather to pray in person. Not because I'm being strict about minyan in any sense, but because I'm strict on community. That is what I'm machmir about. And a minyan is part of the community of the synagogue. Virtual services are great. It was part of the time capsule of Toronto that we changed for the better. We've had members that for years could not attend the service, that were homebound or had illnesses and were not able to come here and pray with their community. And by going online for the first time, some of our members in years were able to participate in their community, listen to services, hear their chazan, hear their rabbi share Torah. And that was a good thing. But for this to become the permanent mode, that is not. Everyone East Coast time simply has to go to a virtual service, broadcast from one of the 2 or 3 large synagogues with the best production value. What's going to happen to us? If we can't make morning minyan, we've been struggling with Friday night Kabbalat Shabbat. Is that next? Are we going to cancel that when we can't make it? On Saturday morning someday, if we start struggling, will we just send people online to those synagogues that have a movie studio rather than a sanctuary? What comes next? A world where there are few synagogues, and instead in your local city you rent a rabbi for a simcha, for a baby naming, for a bar mitzvah, for a wedding, or for a funeral. But synagogues in general just close their doors because nobody wants to go to them. If you want to pray, you can do it online. We are at a crossroads here. Things can change, and you can change them. Show up. Today I know I'm preaching in some ways to the choir, to those of you that are here on Shabbat morning. But we could use you as well on a weekday. And to those of you at home, I say the same thing. I get not everybody is comfortable yet. I understand there are reasons you may not feel safe coming to shul. Let us know. Talk to us if there are things we can do to make you feel more safe. If you want us to explain what we're doing, if there are new measures we can take. But we need you to show up. I know on weekdays, there are days that I look online and we have 2 to 3 times as many people watching the service than are here praying with us. Our parsha begins this week, Re'eh. Anochi notein lifnechem hayom bracha uklala. See, I set before you this day a blessing and a curse. Live streaming, Zoom. It is a blessing and it is a curse. It is a blessing for those who cannot come to synagogue, for those who are ill in the hospital, who are homebound, for the grandparent too far and too ill to travel to come for a simcha. It is a blessing. I've officiated funerals this year where children had to attend virtually to bury their parents because they could not cross the border. In that case, it was a blessing. On my own wedding, when my parents could not come to be here with me, it was a blessing to have them with me virtually. But live streaming, Zoom, it is also a curse. It has taken us away from what a synagogue is, more than a prayer delivery system. Services are as much about the prayers as they are about what else happens when we come together to pray. Remember, halachically, you don't need to pray in a minyan. Services, coming together, it's about bonding over a cup of coffee afterwards. It's about greeting somebody else as you pass by them in the hallway. It's about turning to your neighbor and bonding with them when you think the rabbi's sermon is going on for too long. Service is about more than just coming for prayer. There's a midrash on this verse which teaches, comparing it to 2 paths. One path before you looks beautiful and enticing, and the other looks difficult. One is level and serene, the other is treacherous. The plants along it look thorny. But the Midrash tells us that it's a trick, because if you get to the end of either path, they switch. The one that started out looking beautiful, looking nice, is not so nice at the other end. And the one that was difficult, that was treacherous, the path that was a challenge, it opens up to actually a beautiful destination. It will be hard to return to shul as we finish the pandemic. We'll face setbacks, we'll face challenges, and as numbers increase, who knows? We may go into future lockdowns. As new strains arise in the months to come or even years, it'll be difficult to return to normal. But I can tell you the difficult challenge is the one worth it. Coming to shul, facing these challenges, rather than just taking the easy way out and going online. We must take the difficult path. It leads us to what we are, to what Beth Tikvah is, a community. And I want to end with what Rabbi Grover began with at the beginning of our Torah service. Re'eh, the commandment is singular. Because whether or not we gather in person for services, whether we do it on weekday mornings, on Kabbalat Shabbat on Friday nights, or in Shabbat morning someday maybe, that decision doesn't rest with Rabbi Grover or me, not with Chazan Kavari or with Irv, not with our ritual committee, our board, or even our executive. That decision is up to you. Will you come? Will you commit to being a part of a community? Will you be there? Shabbat Shalom. I hope to see you this week while we still have Minyan.